The sky above the Potomac River was clear on January 30th, 2025. The sun shone brightly. It was a routine day for many, with the usual hustle and bustle of life in the nation's capital. But shortly after noon, the peaceful atmosphere was shattered. A deafening roar split the air. People looked up to see a horrifying sight. An American Airlines regional jet and a Black Hawk helicopter had collided in mid-air. The collision occurred near Reagan National Airport, a stone's throw from the bustling metropolis. The impact was catastrophic. The two aircraft, once symbols of human ingenuity and progress, were now twisted hulks of metal plummeting towards the icy waters below. The horrifying scene unfolded in front of countless witnesses. They watched in disbelief and horror as the unthinkable transpired above them. The impact sent shockwaves through the city. Sirens wailed as emergency responders rushed to the scene. Boats patrolled the river, desperately searching for survivors amidst the debris field. The crash sent a chill down the spines of those who witnessed it, a grim reminder of the fragility of life and the capricious nature of fate. News of the tragedy spread like wildfire. Television screens were dominated by images of the smoldering wreckage. Social media feeds were flooded with messages of shock, grief, and prayers for the victims and their families. It was a day that would forever be etched in the annals of Washington D.C. S history, a day when the skies above the Potomac turned tragic. The collision occurred with terrifying speed. The American Airlines regional jet, en route to Charlotte, North Carolina, was on its final approach to Reagan National Airport. The Black Hawk helicopter, operated by the U.S. military, was on a routine training mission. The two aircraft, on seemingly disparate paths, converged with a sickening crunch of metal. The impact was heard for miles around, a testament to the sheer force of the collision. The regional jet, its fuselage torn asunder, broke into two large pieces. Witnesses described a scene of utter chaos with debris raining down on the river below. The Black Hawk helicopter, its rotors mangled and broken, spiraled towards the water. On the ground, panic ensued. Witnesses to the crash flooded emergency lines, their voices frantic and filled with a mixture of disbelief and horror. First responders rushed to the scene, facing a chaotic scene of twisted metal and burning fuel. The air was thick with the smell of jet fuel and the acrid stench of smoke. The immediate aftermath was a blur of activity. Fireboats battled to extinguish the flames licking at the wreckage. Coast Guard helicopters scanned the water for survivors, their searchlights cutting through the growing darkness. Divers plunged into the frigid waters, their movements hampered by the strong current and poor visibility. It was a race against time, a desperate search for any sign of life amidst the devastation. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the crash site, the full extent of the tragedy became horrifyingly clear. The search and rescue operation, initially fueled by hope, slowly transitioned into a grim recovery effort. Divers, working in shifts, meticulously combed through the wreckage strewn across the riverbed. The cold, murky waters of the Potomac hampered their efforts. Visibility was poor, and the current was strong. Despite the challenging conditions, the rescuers pressed on, driven by a sense of duty and a sliver of hope that they might find survivors. Their determination was unwavering, their resolve steeled by the enormity of the tragedy unfolding before them. As darkness fell, powerful floodlights illuminated the crash site, casting an eerie glow over the recovery operation. Divers, their faces etched with fatigue and sorrow, continued to surface with grim findings. Body bags, each one a stark reminder of the human cost of the tragedy, were brought ashore and solemnly carried away. The search and rescue efforts continued throughout the night and into the next day. The relentless efforts of the first responders, working tirelessly under unimaginable pressure, slowly painted a clearer picture of the tragedy. The death toll continued to rise, each recovered body adding another layer of grief and sorrow to an already heart-wrenching event. Section 4. Identifying the victims and notifying families. While the search and rescue efforts continued, another grim task began: identifying the victims and notifying their families. The process was painstakingly slow and emotionally draining. Dental records, fingerprints, and DNA analysis were used to identify the deceased. For the families of those on board both aircraft, the wait for news was agonizing. Hours turned into an eternity as they clung to hope, praying for a miracle that they knew in their hearts was unlikely to come. The news, when it finally arrived, was devastating. Tears were shed, hearts were broken, and lives were irrevocably changed. The stories of the victims slowly emerged. The pilot of the American Airlines jet, a seasoned veteran with thousands of hours of flight time, the young couple on their way to a long-awaited vacation, the soldier returning home after a tour of duty overseas. Each victim, a life abruptly cut short, leaving behind a void filled with grief and unanswered questions. The task of notifying the families fell upon specially trained grief counselors and representatives from the airlines and the military. It was a heart-wrenching duty, one that left even the most seasoned professionals emotionally drained. The outpouring of grief was overwhelming, a testament to the love and loss felt by those left behind. Section 5. Pieces of the puzzle. Understanding the crash. As the initial shock and grief began to subside, attention turned to understanding what caused this horrific tragedy. How could two aircraft operating in one of the most heavily regulated airspaces in the world collide in broad daylight? The investigation, a complex and multifaceted undertaking, was immediately launched. The National Transportation Safety Board, the agency responsible for investigating civil aviation accidents, took the lead. Working in tandem with the Federal Aviation Administration and other agencies, they began the arduous task of piecing together the events that led to the crash. The investigation, they vowed, would be thorough and exhaustive. The wreckage, carefully recovered from the Potomac River, became the focal point of the investigation. Every piece of debris, every scratch on the metal, every burnt wire held a potential clue. The black boxes containing the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder were recovered and their contents analyzed meticulously. Investigators pored over radar data, air traffic control recordings, and maintenance logs. They interviewed witnesses, scrutinized weather reports, and examined the training records of the pilots. The goal was to create a detailed timeline of events, a minute-by-minute reconstruction of the moments leading up to the collision.